To deform the terrain of a map in Arma 3, you usually need to have the Deformer mod running, or knowledge of how to use the setTerrainHeight script command. This tutorial will teach you how to export and implement the deformations without the need to have the Deformer mod on the server. This works because the setTerrainHeight command is in the base game. As you can see, it was added with version 2.1. Shortly after being added, the Deformer mod was created, which allows you to easily reshape the terrain. Unfortunately, the mod's current user interface does not have a way to export the deformer code to SQF. So I went looking through the Deformer mod files to see where and how the terrain data was saved, so I could make my own way of exporting it to SQF. However, it turned out the dev of the Deformer mod already created an SQF export function. There is no GUI for it yet, so no one knows about it. Let's open up the SQF file and take a look at this function to better understand how it works. This file is basically multiple functions in one, and if we use the exportSQF string as the parameter, it will take the edited terrain grid, create the SQF for it, and copy it to your clipboard. Essentially, this just outputs the script that actually deforms the terrain grid. Now let's open up the init editor, and I'll show you how to export your deformation SQF and add that into your mission SQF, which can then be loaded onto the server. Before we get started on that though, you'll need to meet a couple of requirements. Links to everything will be included in the description of this video. The first thing you need is the Deformer mod in order to make the edits. To get it, just subscribe to it on the Steam Workshop. The second thing you need is the mission SQF Injector composition, also on the Steam Workshop. This will allow you to run complex missions in your Zeus sessions. The last thing you need is Visual Studio Code with the SQF Language Extension. Since we'll be working with SQF code, you're going to want to have syntax highlighting features. If you don't know what any of that means, don't worry, we're only going to make a few simple edits that even a monkey could do. Now that we've got that out of the way, let's make sure we have the mod loaded before jumping into the init editor. In the Arma 3 launcher, in the mods section, search for Deformer and make sure the box is ticked. Now we can launch Arma 3. You probably noticed that I have a bunch of other mods loaded. These are not necessary for deforming the terrain, however they are helpful when creating missions in general. So I've provided a link to my init editor mod preset in the description of this video. If you want to use it, all you have to do is download the HTML file and drag it into your mods page on the launcher. Okay, so let's hit play and wait for Arma 3 to load. Once it does, we'll open up our custom mission in the editor. So here's my example mission. All it took to create this was editing the terrain and then adding the objects and AI in. If you don't know how to use the init editor or the Deformer mod, I've provided the tutorials for those in the description. But the Deformer mod is pretty straightforward. For example, you just press Shift plus Y to open up the toolbar. From there, you can simply edit the height map to raise, lower, smooth, or flatten the ground. Once you're happy with the look of your mission, you should playtest it to verify the gameplay is smooth and there are no visual glitches. Sometimes the terrain will disappear at certain angles if the deformation is too steep, so keep that in mind when making your edits. Also note that if you lower the terrain to below sea level, this will expose the water beneath the terrain, but it will not render the waves on the surface properly, unless it is close enough to the shoreline or wherever the water is naturally. Additionally, AI boats will not be able to pathfind, as they will not recognize the new body of water. Now let's talk about performance. The more edits to the terrain you make, the longer it will take to load them. This basically freezes up the server until it's completely loaded and propagated to all the connected clients. This also adds loading time to players who join the session in progress, as the terrain grid edits have to be applied to them as well. The deformations cannot be undone once they are loaded into the server. So in the context of official Zeus servers, you will need to do #missions as a voted-in admin and then reset the session to clear them out. Due to this and the performance impacts, you must playtest your mission on your own dedicated server before trying to load it in on a public Zeus server. Now that you understand these things, all you have to do to export the SQF is go to Tools, Open the debug console and run the function I showed earlier with the exportSQF parameter. The full command will also be available in the description of the video for easy copy pasting. Once you have it in the expression field, run the command locally and wait for the pop-up. Press copy and you should now have the code copied to your clipboard. Now open Visual Studio Code, create a new file, and paste in the exported script. Generally, you want to keep this at the top of your mission SQF so that the terrain gets deformed prior to spawning in the objects. If you are loading the terrain deformation onto your own dedicated server, you can just put the code into your init server.sqf file. But this tutorial is more geared towards public Zeus players, so I'll now be showing you how to load this dynamically into a session. Before we do that though, you typically want to have the deformations paired with an actual mission. So let's quickly export the mission to SQF and add that to our script. Now that we have the mission SQF copied from Eden, we are done with the editor portion of the video. Next, just paste the mission SQF into our script in Visual Studio after the deformation code we pasted earlier. Now before making any further edits, let's go ahead and save it as an SQF file. That way the syntax highlighting turns on. Keep in mind this whole thing is designed to be executed on the server. Actually, the setTerrainHeight command must be ran server-side for it to work at all. Same thing goes for the hide terrain objects and smoke modules in my example mission. This will require the ability to execute SQF via a composition. Luckily, some of the official servers allow this. For a full list of official Zeus servers which allow this type of script execution, check out the description. But just know that it's usually the even-numbered servers. I'll show you what I mean by that shortly, but for now, we need to shut the game down and unload the mods so we can join the official servers. And while we're waiting, why don't you go ahead and take this time to hit the like button on the video. I would really appreciate that. Okay, so let's hop into an even-numbered official Zeus server. In this case, we'll use USA04, and we'll join as Game Master. I should also mention that if you're going to do this on your own dedicated server, you need to enable scripted comps in the description.ext file. I'm sure there's a tutorial for that somewhere on the internet. Once we're in the game as Game Master, find the Injector composition, paste the Deformer script and mission SQF, and run it server-side with the server button. Now we wait for the mission to load in. I'm just going to go ahead and find where I spawned it. And there you have it. It looks like the deformations worked and the object spawned in properly. So I hope to see some really creative missions coming from the community now that you all have this at your disposal. Alright, goobers, that's about it. If you have any questions, problems, suggestions, leave a comment and I might reply.